how you're liking virtual meetings. So I appreciate your feedback on that. Next slide. And finally, we've got MassDOT's policy on diversity and civil rights on screen, which you can read. It says that we comply with all federal and state civil rights requirements based on preventing discrimination based on protected characteristics. And if you have further questions, you can contact the Office of Diversity and Civil Rights. So for now, I'll turn it back over to Susan.
Okay. Did you want to look at the question slides?
You're right. Yeah. I'll do a quick rundown of how the Q&A will work too. So online, it's Alt-H to submit your questions and comments, or Alt-Y to raise your hand. There's also a little graphic on there of how you could find the raise hand button. You have to click on reactions and then raise hand. We'll take one question at a time and limit it to 2 minutes. That's for everyone. And just for the in-person audience, I really appreciate that we have this hybrid option. And so for the people who are virtual, it's really helpful if you can always introduce yourself before speaking and always use the mic that will be provided. Otherwise, for the people who are virtual, it's like they can't really hear you very well and they can't tell who's speaking, and it gets to be kind of a subpar experience for them. So I appreciate your cooperation with that. And as always, we'll take task force member questions first.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leah. Okay, so for today's agenda, the first topic on the agenda is the Cambridge Street Bridge update. The second will be the West Station bus loop layout. The third, shoreline alternatives. Then a few quick general updates, and then we'll be opening it up, as Leah said, for general questions. We did get some feedback from the task force that there were other topics that they'd like to talk about at this meeting. What I'd like to ask is just to please save any of the questions relative to those other topics for that Q&A that happens at the end. And some of those larger items, it's very likely that we're planning to talk about them at the next task force meeting in May. So for the Cambridge Street Bridge update, I'm going to pass it over to Katie Mancinelli from VHB.
Thanks, Susan. As Susan said, I'm Katie Mancinelli from VHB, and I'm here to talk to you about Cambridge Street and provide some updates. My colleague, Wayne Amico, is also here to help answer any questions you may have. So I'm excited to give you some positive updates, I think. So 2 things I want to talk about for Cambridge Street Bridge tonight. The first is about the comparison between a rehab option and a preservation plus replacement option. The second thing I'd like to talk about is kind of follow up to some questions we received verbally at the December 7th site walk for the Cambridge Street Bridge. So first, the comparison matrix. All right, there is a lot to cover within the matrix itself. Okay, sorry, there's a lot to cover with the matrix itself, but first I want to give you an update kind of on how we got here. So step 1 was we had to determine whether a replacement alternative was feasible or not. So the team has gotten together, we developed a concept profile and a structure depth that would reduce the approach grades on Cambridge Street to be ADA compliant and tie into the adjacent physical constraints in the area and provide a consistent cross slope between eastbound and westbound, among other things. So once we had that, we realized that this profile reduction, reducing those approach grades, would require lowering the MBTA railroad tracks and I90. So we got together with the multimodal team and we talked a little bit further about the lowering of the tracks and the pike and whether or not that was feasible. So at that time we determined, yeah, this is a reasonable alternative, and in general it is feasible. So step 1, check. We have a feasible concept for a replacement. The next step that we needed to do was to begin evaluating the rehab option versus a replacement option based on the criteria we mentioned at the last task force meeting in November. So as we began to fully vet these 2 alternatives, it became clear that a replacement option would have to occur either with or after the multimodal project due to the lowering of the pike and the railroad tracks. So this could not occur before the multimodal project. And speaking with the bridge and the maintenance groups, it also became clear that without repairs to the bridge, this bridge would likely need to be posted for weight restrictions in the next couple of years. So based on this information, a new option was born, which is the preservation project now with a full replacement occurring as part of or after the multimodal project. So the next few slides are going to summarize some of the key points of this comparison. The first slide here is basically a summary of the scope items that would be included in either a rehab or a preservation plus replacement. So option one, the rehab. This is what we've been talking to you about most recently. You're pretty familiar with it. Replacing the deck, cleaning and painting the steel, replacing the approach sidewalks and the Lincoln Street switchback ramp, installing a mid-block crossing with a hawk signal, and updating the ped and bike accommodations. This all requires utility relocations to accommodate the future Cambridge Street bypass road. So a preservation, which would occur right now, would be much more limited to structural repairs. We would just be replacing the westbound sidewalk on the bridge deck itself. Isolated deck and eastbound sidewalk repairs, limited substructure repairs and deck joint replacement, some steel beam end repairs, and minor utility repair work. So again, just patching it up essentially to get us to the replacement project. So the replacement, like we said, has to be either part of or after the multimodal because of the lowering of the railroad and I90. This would be a full bridge replacement and do a lot of the same things the rehab option does with regards to replacing the approach sidewalks, replacing the Lincoln Street switchback ramp, installing a mid-block crossing that would probably be integrated into that Cambridge Street bypass road, updating the ped and bike accommodations, lowering the approach grades to be ADA compliant, and all of this requires substantial utility relocations. Going forward, some other summary criteria for these three options: the design life, a rehab gets you 25 to 30 years, a preservation 10 to 15 to get you to a full replacement, which would be the 75-year design life. The construction start for the rehab and the preservation would be 2025, 2026 timeframe. And then the replacement would have to be, if it was part of the multimodal, it would be about halfway through 3/4 of the way through the project, depending how the overall staging of that project. So about a year 2030 start, but that's not set in stone. The construction duration for the rehab is 4 to 5 years. Preservation is 2 years, and then the replacement could be up to 5 years, but again, this would be woven into the multimodal and could be optimized based on how they stage that project overall. So a couple more things I want to touch on before moving on to the questions. A few other points that I think are really important to this group is accessibility, and what I mean by that is ADA compliance and a less than 5% profile slope. So a rehab and a preservation do not provide consistent cross slopes between eastbound and westbound, and it maintains the existing profile, which is averages 5%, but does exceed in places, which is not ADA compliant. A new bridge would provide that consistent roadway cross slope in addition to providing that ADA compliant less than 5% profile. So when I'm talking about access points, I'm really talking about the Lincoln Street switchback, the Franklin Street pedestrian bridge, and then a mid-block crossing. And so the rehab would maintain the Franklin Street connection as it is today, and it would reconstruct the Lincoln Street ramp and provide that mid-block crossing with the hawk signal. A preservation maintains that existing Franklin Street connection, but as we said, it would be limited to structural repairs, so no new Lincoln Street switchback and no signal regulated mid-block crossing. The replacement obviously severs the connection to the existing Franklin Street bridge, but you know, if it were tied into the multimodal, hopefully you have a new bridge at that point anyway, so it would be a moot point, and then it reconstructs the Lincoln Street ramp and then ties in a full signal with that bypass road. The last two things are safety and peer relocations that I want to touch on. So talking about safety, what I mean is safe for all non-motorized users, and then also the structure condition, which could be a safety concern if it goes too far. So for the rehab, as we've been discussing, it would update the ped and bike accommodations to meet current standards, and then it replaces and repairs the worst conditions sooner. The preservation doesn't further improve the ped and bike accommodations in the area, other than the things that the city of Boston changed in the past couple of years as far as striping goes, and then it repairs the worst conditions only on the bridge. For replacement, obviously, better ped and bike accommodations, but there's a longer lead time to the full replacement, and the structure condition would worsen in that time. As far as relocating piers, the rehab and preservation, there's no opportunity. The replacement, there is some minor adjustments that could be handled. So that's it on that. Now we're going to move on to a lot of more dense text. I apologize for this, but here's an update on some of the questions maybe we wanted to answer more thoroughly from the site walk that was on December 7th. So the first thing was about the maintenance of the westbound sidewalk. And since we spoke last, MassDOT maintenance removed the weeds and trash on the closed off portion. We found out the city of Boston owns the lighting, and we've started communications with them about getting the lighting working again. We've also made National Grid Gas aware of the gas smell that's on the eastern side of the bridge. The next topic I want to cover is the discussion of reducing Cambridge Street eastbound to a single lane between Harvard and Linden. So we went back, we looked at the traffic volumes again, we looked at the multimodal future projection for the traffic volumes as well to see whether or not traffic could support reduction of the lane in that area. And what we found was that it wasn't precluded. Basically, the projected traffic did not back up into that area. So we have that information now, and so we're working with the city of Boston to discuss further because they're the ones who are going to own the roadway at the end of the day, and we need to get them on board with everything. So that's the update there. I also want to mention some community input we received from A Better City, who submitted a design concept with regards to a bridge cross section and operational designs for peds and bikes. And we're looking at it, and we're going to evaluate how to incorporate pieces or some or all of it into a final cross section, which would either be a part of a rehab or the full replacement. Another topic we touched on was the raised crossings at Highgate and Linden. And so MassDOT's been evaluating the feasibility of integrating some type of raised crossing, and we think that Linden at a minimum seems like a strong contender for that. So we're looking at that a little bit further. The median width question keeps coming up, and so I want to put a hammer down in the nail. So we went back, we double, triple, quadruple checked, and it's 6 feet minimum on the median. So that's kind of where we're at now. We also talked about landscape opportunities within the corridor, and we'll look for them, but we are kind of constrained for space. So there's really not a lot of opportunities for landscaping here. And I also want to mention that no landscaping is going to be allowed on the bridge just because it's a maintenance concern. Last thing, and then we'll open up for questions. Thanks for your patience. So this was a big topic at the site walk, which is the Hawk pedestrian signal versus a full pedestrian signal. And we tried to answer it, but I don't think we were fully satisfying everyone with our answer. So I'm going to read this verbatim so I don't misspeak to try and answer why a hawk is being used in this area. So for any traffic signal to be installed per the MUTCD, at a minimum, a traffic signal warrant needs to be satisfied. MassDOT and all municipalities are bound by MGL Chapter 85, Section 2 to conform to the MUTCD. Based on data collected and observations, as well as assumptions related to recirculation of existing pedestrian patterns associated with a potential mid-block crossing, this location does not appear to meet the criteria for a full stop-and-go signal. So VHB reviewed the PED activity at both the existing PED bridge and at the switchback location. And again, with reasonable assumptions regarding pedestrian recirculation, a mid-block crossing can likely meet the lower 20 pedestrians per hour threshold for a warrant requirement to support the installation of a Hawk signal. After installation, should a full signal be warranted, which would be in excess of 100 pedestrians in an hour, the equipment would be in place to basically switch out the heads to support a full pedestrian traffic signal. So with that, thank you for your patience and for listening, and I'm going to open it up to a couple of questions.
Yep, and that's open again to in-person and online. So in person, HSH will be coming around with mics. And I already have a person online who has their hand raised, Jessica Robertson. So why don't I take that first question while the mics are being passed around. Jessica, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, and I first just wanted to say thank you for doing the hybrid meeting. It's really great to have an in-person option. I would be there, but I'm under the weather today. So I had two questions. First, I'll take them out of order based on what slide is up. Do you happen to know the pedestrian volume at currently on the footbridge?
I do have that information at my desk. Jessica, can I come back to you at the full Q&A with that?
Sure.
Okay.
Because I think, as Fred said in a meeting many years ago, you don't measure the demand for a bridge by counting how many people are swimming across the river. So we should be not looking at how many people are crossing at Mansfield today where there is no crosswalk, but instead, how many people are crossing everywhere on the bridge, including using the footbridge and going down to the intersection. Then my other question was about lowering I90 and the railroad tracks. And it's obvious to all of us that, that is necessary in order to lower the bridge, but it was unclear whether the lowering, making the bridge ADA accessible requires lowering the pike and the train tracks more than they otherwise would have been lowered through the multimodal project, because right now the highway is starting to ramp up under the bridge. Obviously, when we do the multimodal project, that will not be the case. So that is some lowering we would have done already. Does the bridge replacement option require additional lowering?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So yes, it does require additional lowering for both the I-90 and the railroad tracks beyond what was initially scoped for the multimodal. I believe the railroad tracks were another 18 inches lower, 12 to 18 inches, something like that for the bridge replacement. And then I-90 was not intended to be lowered underneath the bridge at all initially as part of the multimodal. So I believe we're lowering, again, 1 to 2 feet in that range on I-90 because of a potential replacement.
Great. Let's go to in person now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is Stacy Thompson at Livable Streets. I'm a task force member. And I just wanted to follow up on 2 points and come back to the hawk signal piece for a second. I'm pretty sure that some of the pedestrian counts that Jess flagged will show a larger amount, but I'm also curious why there was no modeling for future conditions. We know that we are going to be adding walking and biking conditions. We're basically building an entire neighborhood. And it just strikes me that at the earliest, we're saying the conditions on this bridge will improve in 2030. So should we not be seeing modeling from the team for bike and ped conditions based on all of the future induced demand by the infrastructure we are building through this project? So curious why that work wasn't done. And then I also just want to clarify something on the preserve section. All of the slides seem to indicate that there would be no bike and ped improvements during that section. Are you saying that MassDOT would not consider paint and flex post tactical changes during that time? Because to me, it seems like there should be some openness to safety related tactical improvements if we need to go through this delay. So I'm just curious why we're not offering tactical improvements during that time period.
Yeah, so I'd like to address your first question. So as far as ped and bike, there really isn't any guidance for usage, projecting out usage. And so we did assume some increase in demand, and that's what we're referring to when I say reasonable assumptions regarding pedestrian recirculation, right? And I know that demand may increase because you're going to have more facilities in the area for people to use, correct? But as far as traffic modeling, there really just isn't a lot of way to project out that information and what pedestrians are going to be using because you build a new building, et cetera. So we did talk about recirculation. We did account for, to kind of follow up to Jessica's question as well, we did count everybody going over the bridge, right? And we said some people are going to now use the mid-block crossing that were at Harvard, some who are at Lincoln, like things are going to get recirculated.
But again, just to clarify, so you're saying that you went to CTPS and CTPS said we cannot model bike and ped options?
No, that's just
So
no.
I want to push on this because there are examples. We could be looking at similar projects across the countries. Modeling is all made up, right?
Yeah.
It is all made up. So like, let's be honest about that. And there are examples, and I would like to hear from CTPS about what is possible since that is their job. Thank you.
Yeah, and we can definitely look at that. I think the second answer to your question is that when the multimodal gets constructed and the bypass road gets put in place, a full pedestrian signal would be there because it would just be a part of the bypass road. So there would be a full signalized option once all those facilities are, kind of open and constructed after the big multimodal project. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. And then your second question, forgive me, I'm trying to remember, was so what would happen is that when we open up that westbound sidewalk, that current HMA sidewalk goes away, right? And so we've got more space on that westbound side. And so it wouldn't look exactly the way it looks today. I think what would end up happening is that bike lane would get more buffer. I think the buffer is like a foot now, right? And so you'd come in with the buffer that we would want. And I think that striping is definitely on the table as part of a rehab. And what I meant was we are not going to be extending the sidewalk, changing how everything approaches, doing the mid-block crossing. So yes, striping is definitely on the table.
All right, and that was kind of our 5 minutes. I know probably other people had questions. Susan, I'll let you make the call. You want to extend it or leave them till the end?
Was there one more hand raised?
Maybe we'll leave them to the end so we can.
At the end, I apologize.
Got a full schedule. All right. Let's end that
Well,
Q&A.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to introduce Ryan, who's going to be speaking about the West Station bus.
Thank you, Katie. So I am Ryan Cullen with VHB. I will be walking through our current thinking on the West Station bus loop. Task force members, if you had received a copy of the slide deck ahead of time, I just want to note the next two slides we did make a few tweaks to, so we just split them apart and added a couple more points. And so getting started, I wanted to quickly run through some of the base assumptions that we're using to sort of underlie the planning and design process that we're going through. And so for the bus loop, we're assuming that this station is going to serve 3 private shuttles. Those would require 6 berthing positions, and this station would be served by full-size transit buses that are 40 feet in length, and that's the length of a standard MBTA transit bus. And we're also striving to allow for independent operations at each berth, meaning that buses at adjacent berths are able to pull in and out independently of one another and don't have to wait for a bus at an adjacent berth to move out of the way. We're also assuming at this time that if the MBTA Route 64 bus were to be rerouted through the station area, that it would stop on Seattle Street. It would not circulate within the station itself or within the busway itself. And building on these assumptions, we've currently developed 2 concepts that we'll walk through today. The first is a parallel busway concept, and concept 2 we're calling the loop busway. And I want to stress that these are sort of works in progress, a snapshot of where the design and thinking is currently at. We've developed the concepts that you're going to see today to the level of detail that we're showing purely for the purpose of properly evaluating them. We in no way want to preclude any other options that might better utilize the space or improve access and optimize station operations. We've also been coordinating the design with the interchange layout and the MBTA. So the options that you'll see today, they're shown on the 3L interchange layout, but they do work on the 3L mod interchange layout, and we're actively working on incorporating those into that layout. Noting that the 3L mod interchange does have additional pedestrian and bike benefits from the perspective that we're seeing right now compared to the 3L interchange. And on the MBTA front, we have gone through, and this design has been reviewed in meetings with the MBTA bus operations and service delivery teams. Their input will be incorporated into the concepts that you see. For example, making sure that our mid-block stop on Seattle Street is adequately sized. And we're also paying great attention to the pedestrian and bicycle circulation in the station, around the station, coming to and from the station. And some of those points we'll be pointing out today for you. So this is our first concept. This is what we're calling parallel busways. Just to orient everyone starting off, north is approximately, just due to the top of the page, there's the north arrow on the top left. To provide some additional orientation, here is future I90 running east-west at the top. Boston University would be to the south of the page, and the Charles River and the BU Bridge is off to the right. Looking closer in the station area for additional context, highlighted in orange, these are the station head houses. That's where you would access the actual rail platforms down from the bus deck area. And with that, we'll get into a little bit of the details of the actual layout. So right around callout 1, these are the two parallel busways coming off of the Cambridge Street Bypass Road, running parallel to one another prior to going back, exiting onto the Cambridge Street Bypass Road. We're providing these 6 berths shown here. Any of them would be accessible to any bus. Down at callout 2, you'd see some potential additional area for bus layover that could be utilized if needed after circulating through the busway. And then up at callout 3, this is a pickup drop-off lane that could be used by TNCs, private vehicles. It's also maybe potential to be used for MBTA bus staging during diversions. Moving over to callout 4 on Seattle Street, this is where we're envisioning the MBTA Route 64 stops being placed, stopping on Seattle Street rather than circulating through the station itself. Callout 5, this is on Seattle Street and Cambridge Street. These roadway cross sections right now, I just want to note, are just generic cross sections. We're showing 2 lanes in each direction, and we're showing that while we wait for additional CTPS modeling. At that time that we get additional CTPS modeling, we will have traffic evaluations performed, and at that point we'll also look at the feasibility of incorporating any dedicated bus lanes around the station area. Down at callout 6 in the bottom left, we're showing a connection from the station area for peds and bikes down to the south side buffer path and the Malvern Street connector. The previous task force meeting walked through several options for how this connection could be made, both to the south side buffer path and the Malvern Street connector. We're showing this elevated connection here purely as an example. All the options that were presented in that last task force meeting are still on the table. And then moving up to callout 7, like I mentioned earlier, this is just a reminder that the 3L interchange layout is being shown here, but the 3L mod also sort of works with this option, and is we're working on integrating this bus layout into the 3L mod layout, interchange layout as well. So the next few slides that I'll walk through are going to walk through some of the potential circulation routes for potential private shuttles that might serve the station. So coming from the south up from the Malvern Street connector, this is how a Ruggles or LMA shuttle might, a Ruggles LMA shuttle might circulate up to the Cambridge Street Bypass Road, enter into the station, and then continue back to the south. Next, we have a potential Harvard shuttle coming from the northwest, coming down Seattle Street onto the Cambridge Street Bypass Road, entering the busway, accessing any of these berths before exiting back, going north on Seattle Street. I just want to note that these routes are completely flexible. This is sort of an exercise to determine whether routes from any direction could be served by the busway. For example, a bus could exit the station and head out north, returning toward Harvard via Cattle Drive. That could form a one-way loop, or the route could come from the northeast altogether and loop back, just like this potential Leechmere-Kendall Central shuttle, coming down from Cattle Drive, entering the busway, returning back on the Cambridge Street Bypass Road, heading back north on Cattle Drive. Again, with the option to form a one-way loop by returning north via Seattle Street. And then finally, here's that MBTA Route 64 bus. This would stay on Seattle Street. Like I mentioned, it does not circulate within the busway area. Here are those 2 stops on street. And I just want to note that although the southbound bus would stop on the side of the street opposite the core station area, there are additional head houses shown just off screen, unfortunately, on the west side of Seattle Street. So anyone looking to make a transfer between bus and rail could do so via these head houses on the west side of Seattle Street, would not have to cross Seattle Street to get to the core station area. And then this slide just highlights in green what the bike access and connectivity is along the station. So we have two-way bikeway along the east side of Seattle Street, along that station frontage, connecting back north via Cattle Drive and Seattle Street to the rest of the proposed interchange network, heading west down the Cambridge Street Bypass Road, as well as connecting down to that south side buffer path and the Melbourne Street connector. Now we'll take a look at our second option. This is our loop busway. So you'll see right around in the core station area, call out 1, here is our busway circulating clockwise, shown at call out 2. And we're circulating clockwise rather than counterclockwise for a couple of reasons. One, it allows the birds to be placed right adjacent to the station head houses. So anyone looking to make a transfer between rail and bus would not have to cross the busway to do so. And for this, in the second reason we're showing a clockwise circulation is because it really improved some of the turning geometry for buses making turns, exiting the busway and going back out onto the surrounding streets. You'll see at call out 3, we're still showing that same pickup drop-off lane that we showed in the first option. Over at call out 4, you're seeing the similar bus stops for the MBTA Route 64 happening on street on Seattle Street. Just a reminder again that call out 5, these Seattle Street and Cambridge Street Bypass Road cross sections are generic until further traffic evaluations can be performed and we can take a look at the feasibility of incorporating bus lanes on those segments surrounding the station. Call out 6 again, we have our connection down from the bus deck area to the south side buffer path, down to the Melbourne Street connector. At call out 7, I want to highlight that this access point in and out of the busway here on Seattle Street, that is a right in, right out only condition, so there wouldn't be any lefts in or any lefts out, and that's for the purpose of just simplifying the traffic operations there, given that that access point is so close to the adjacent intersections. And then finally up at call out 8, again a reminder that this is the 3L, but the 3L mod also works with this option. And I'll again walk through the circulation for the potential shuttle routes. So coming up from a Malvern Street connector, a Ruggles LMA shuttle would go on Seattle Street, enter the busway, circulate clockwise. It could circulate half a time. It could go back around and access additional berths if it were looking to lay over for a few minutes before heading back out onto the Cambridge Street Bypass Road and back to the south. A Harvard shuttle would come down Seattle, onto the Cambridge Street Bypass Road before entering the station, could circulate as needed, could exit via the west end, back north up Seattle Street, or via the east end of the busway loop, back north via Cattle Drive. And then the Leechmere-Kendall Central shuttle coming down Cattle Drive, entering the busway, circulating as needed, heading back toward Cattle Drive, or heading back via Seattle Street. And finally, the MBTA Route 64, identical circulation to the first option. Again, highlighting the bike access and connectivity for this option. It's essentially the same as the first option. A lot of two-way bike access along the immediate station frontage, connecting north and west to the rest of the street network proposed under the interchange project, and connecting to the south side buffer path and the Melbourne Street connector as well. So I'll pause here for questions. This is just for reference. I have both options up here while we go through questions.
Thanks. So again, we're going to take about 5 minutes of clarifying quicker questions, I'm actually going to pass it to Hung, who has a written Q&A online first.
Yeah, there are 4 questions from Harry Madison, and I'm going to choose his last question when he asked if the shuttles can use a one-way loop using Seattle and Cattle Drive, why is the bus loop needed at all?
The bus loop really just maximized flexibility, like if you were trying to recirculate to another berth to layover, for example, or serving the Malvern, I'll go to one of these examples, serving the shuttle that's coming from the south, the bus loop really helps with that option. It makes a lot of the recirculation happening, it makes it happen internal to the busway where there wouldn't be any congestion. But really just for additional flexibility, even though it could be a one-way loop.
All right, let's take an in-person question next. If there are any, if not, oh, looks like there's one.
Thanks, great. This is Galen Mook, task force member as well. First off, again, thank you for having the hybrid. I think this is an effective way to host these types of meetings. And a couple questions I have here. One, just to be clear, none of this is dedicated busway except for the bus loop itself. This would be in general traffic, and the intersections would be general traffic as well, right?
At this point, yes. I mentioned that we're waiting for the CTPS modeling.
Great.
It would be, at that time, our plan to look at the feasibility of bus lanes on the streets surrounding the station area.
Okay. I think my comment there is I probably will like to see that and will approve of whatever independent separated busways there are to prevent bus traffic from getting caught in general traffic, which is this is an off-ramp to a highway and an on-ramp to a highway. So I just want to make that clear is that this is a busway. Let's try to keep it for buses priority. I would love to see that. Another comment is on the bike connectivity slide, can you just go back to either 22 or 28? I appreciate this. I would love to see this slide where at the intersections it's not green, but like red with some like danger stripes on it to showcase where there is vulnerability for the bicyclists, especially, again, this is an off-ramp and an on-ramp for intersections for the bike. So just that's a comment around the slide design, just to show that these are not green pathways when you're crossing a 5-lane intersection of off-ramp traffic. Just throwing that out there. And then one question is around the differentiation between the two options here. Are we to assume that regardless of which option that there's going to be like full decking right here? So this is elevated above the pike, elevated above the trains, and regardless of which it is, they'll have the same amount of developable land or build rights, air rights, and all the rest. Does that change in between either of these options?
So the amount of decking might be marginally different. So like, for example, this loop option takes, from what we can tell, and like, again, not knowing exactly what the street cross section would be, this loop option, the deck size is slightly larger than the parallel option. It's just a little bit, the parallel option is a little bit more of a compact busway. And that's just because of the dimension that you need to stack a bus exiting the busway up at the intersection, getting back onto the surrounding road. So that's a little bit of a difference. The idea is that this would all be decked over. Maybe there's potential that some elements aren't. I know there's, we're looking into the sort of plaza programming and how that would all be laid out. But between the two options, similar decking areas, but this option, the loop option, would likely be a little bit bigger. But in terms of like what area would be open to development, similar.
Okay, great. I think it's an interesting concept to start even this early in the phase of what this might look like if other elements were built into it, plazas, residents, cafes, et cetera, and how that might change depending on which option, because we do want these to be placemaking for people, not just for buses, because buses are for people. Mm-hmm. So what would be a human scale element if there is any difference there? Last question too, and I know that's not the purview, but I would encourage.
It's been, we kind of ran out of our 5
minutes. I will jump
minutes.
in, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Let's move on to the next presentation.
Thanks. Good evening, Mark Forbert at Tetra Tech. I'll go through the shoreline existing conditions. Excuse me. So the water level of the Charles River is controlled by the Charles River Dam, which is underneath the Zachem Bridge. It keeps the elevation of the water pretty consistent between elevations 0 and 2. The bank in this area is man-made. It's a riprap shoreline below elevation 3. There's no vegetated wetlands on the bank, and it's dominated by invasive and nuisance species, including tree of heaven and false indigo bush. In 2019, we did a wildlife habitat assessment. Wildlife scientists and wildlife biologists went out and looked at the shoreline and found minimal wildlife habitat. There's also minimal ecological functions and values, and there is an absence of hydric soils out there, mostly because the dam so controls the river, and the material used to fill the river wasn't conducive to turning into hydric soils. I'm going to go over the jurisdictions of the various regulatory agencies we have that are going to be working on this project. Starting with elevation 2, that is waters of the United States. That's the extent of. Sure. That's the extent of the Army Corps' jurisdiction. That's elevation 2, and also elevation 2 is also the extent of the Waterways Program's jurisdiction. That's DEP Waterways. Works for filled and flow tidelands. The flow tidelands are below elevation 2. There are extensive fill tidelands also located on the site, which are within their jurisdiction. From a wetlands protection standpoint, we start at elevation 4, which is the 100-year flood, and go to elevation 2. Between elevation 2 and 4 is bordering land subject to flooding. Any fill within that area would need to be mitigated at the same 1-to-1 ratio. From elevation 0 to 2 is inland bank, which would also be replicated. And below elevation 0 is land underwater, and those are the state wetland resource areas. Here's a project view looking to the west. We have I90, SFR, and the Charles River from left to right. This is the section that was included in our notice of project change. Down below, we have the commuter rail, Grand Junction Rail, I90 east and west, and Soldier Field Road. This also shows the Paul Dudley Light Path on a 22-foot wide boardwalk in the river, pile supported. And here's a rendering looking to the east with the Agganis connection on the right side of the screen, and the Paul Dudley White Path, again supported by piles in the river. The throat area design has continued to evolve. We're starting closest to the river. You'll see the Soldiers Field Road turnout for the Paul Dudley White Path. That's to give access during emergencies and maintenance for the shoreline. Came about based on discussions with DCR, and they're wanting to be able to access the river and also get emergency vehicles down for if there's any incidents on the boardwalk. Also between Soldiers Field Road and I90, we have an additional width for potentially resiliency measures. That would be some sort of barrier possibly between the two. That's still under development. We're still studying that. There's also some additional width required for the diverging Worcester Main Line and Grand Junction rail alignments. To your right, you can see section BB. That is where there's some additional width is required for placement of Grand Junction bridge columns between the barrels of I90. And I'm going to go through sections A and section B now, the next sheet. There you see that potential resiliency wall in here, the essential resiliency wall between the river and I90, which is an evacuation route, so it has to be maintained at all times. We also have the, and then down below section BB is the additional width required for this bridge column to support the Grand Junction rail line. That additional 5 feet of width from all those elements, the potential resiliency measures, the diverging Worcester Main Line and Grand Junction rail alignments, and the Grand Junction bridge columns is approximately, will approximately impact 200 linear feet. That, you can see this blue line, that is the existing elevation 2. And so you can see a small portion of Soldier Field Road would be located below that elevation 2. So I'm going to go over the project's framework for the proposed riverbank design. This is not everything that we looked at. These are just the major items we looked at. One of the big ones is minimizing fill in accordance with federal, state, and local environmental permitting requirements. Along those lines, we've met with the Army Corps. Based on those preliminary discussions, they indicated they would expect the project to be approved under a general permit. The requirements for the general permit would mean that it would be less than 1 acre of fill allowed in the river. We also, our next set of meetings is going to be with DEP to go over what we're presenting today and discuss the shoreline options and the permittability of those also. One of our big items is addressing concerns of river users. Based on our discussions with the DCR, future maintenance has become a big issue, is how do you get down and maintain the walkway? How do you maintain the shoreline we're creating? Ecological improvements are always foremost, enhancing and establishing habitat along the riverbank. And the historic cultural preservation, it's reestablishing that parkway feel, planting trees along Soldiers Field Road, and also preserving and enhancing views to and from the river. I'm going to pass it over to Dave now to discuss some of the options.
Thanks, Dave Andrews, Brian Richardson and Rowe, Landscape Architects. These parameters that Mark is outlining are critical to how we're thinking about the shoreline and what we're able to actually do on the shoreline. So they're leading a lot of the decisions that we're making. I want to take a little step back and to sort of frame the whole shoreline of the project. There's over 4,000 linear feet of shoreline in the project. In its existing conditions, there are areas where it's already vertical granite block wall, Cambridge Street Bridge, where the space is really tight. As you move sort of south on the site, you get to this, it's generally a planted embankment with a riprap edge along the water line. As we move forward with the design, we'll be trying to find ways to improve the shoreline design and improve the treatment along the edge. So what's highlighted in blue will likely stay the same. That's the granite block wall that's there. It's really tight space. Where we have the yellow, it's about 1,700 feet of shoreline that's going to be along a new DCR park. So we have a little bit more room to work with. This is a pretty narrow park. It's about 150 feet at its widest, and it's a long crescent shape. But there are opportunities we can explore for improving that river's edge. There in purple is the throat area, which Mark was just highlighting, which we'll go into a bit more detail on. And that is one of the more tricky spots that we have to deal with. We're really tight on space, and all these parameters we're trying to fit in and make work in this stretch. And the last segment, highlighting green, is where the project site's transitioning back into the existing shoreline, the existing planted shoreline with that riprap edge. And what we want to walk through today is just to give you an update and a snapshot of where we're at. So we're going to look at a couple different cross sections of the shoreline treatment that are us exploring different ways we can do this while we're getting feedback from MassDOT and DCR about some of these ideas. So it's not a preferred or a decided approach at this stage. This is zooming into that purple area, the throat area that Mark was talking about. And I want to just point out a couple key things moving on the page from top to bottom. The first is a small dashed line. You'll see that's the buoy line that was placed in the Charles to sort of show the maximum the project team is envisioning the project impacts extending into the river. The next moving down is the Paul Dudley White Path on structure, as we talked about. Then we have a narrow strip of shoreline, which we're dealing with in a couple different ways. It shows a turnout here as well in the center, right here, that turnout area. And then we have Soldier Field Road, west and eastbound, I90 west and eastbound, and the rail corridor. All the project's fill is happening in this stretch, right? And so that limit of about an acre fill that Mark talked about is occurring in this location and includes the structure itself, any structural supports for the Paul Dudley White Path. It's a challenging planting environment. It's relatively a north-facing slope, so it's a challenge to establish plants on it. And it's difficult for maintenance. But there is a great opportunity for the Paul Dudley White Path because this is a unique experience of enjoying the river that we don't really have. It's a different way to enjoy the river, so there's a real opportunity there as well. This section is the original planted option that was shown in the notice of project change. It had about a 2-to-1 slope. It maxed out the fill that could be put into the river. It shows the boardwalk out on structural supports, and it was trying to address community desire for a natural planted shoreline. There are some challenges in this, especially as Mark talked about the roadway pushing further into the river a little bit. The space we have between the road and the river is getting smaller, which makes a challenge to address that grade change from Soldier Road down to the water level. It's anywhere from 9.5 feet down to about 5 feet of grade change we have to address in this small space. So here's where we started to look at, well, what could we do? So we just explored some general options. This option showed similar planted embankment, planted slope, but what we're trying to do is address Soldier Road by having a flat space that allows for tree planting along Soldier Road. We only have one side where we can plant on, so we're trying to make sure that we can at least address the streetscape experience and try to bring back some of that parkway experience. The river's edge, which is down at the bottom, here we're trying to incorporate some river's edge planting. Again, there's not much fluctuation in water level, so it's not a true wetland. This is just planting adjacent to a water body. And then, of course, in the middle is the actual planted slope itself. So here, in theory, this concept really kind of ticks a lot of boxes. We have our parkway improvements, river's edge improvements, some habitat and ecological restoration along the slope, but we have a lot of fill, and we have a lot of grade challenges from the Soldier Field Road down to the water level. We've been talking with DCR about this option, and their maintenance concerns and how they get down and can maintain this slope is also a big question. We then looked at, what if we have a really narrow space? What improvements could we do in those conditions? So one idea is you reinstate a vertical granite wall along the river's edge, but still carve out a street level planting area, so you can still get some improvements along Soldier Field Road. This is more maintainable, especially if you have turnouts that DCR can get access to, but it's not providing much ecological restoration opportunities. Then we looked at a sort of a hybrid version, where we're using the wall to help address some of this grade change. We still maintain our Soldier Field Road parkway experience improvements and have some river's edge treatment. The biggest challenge that we've encountered is DCR's ability to actually maintain this, particularly the river's edge treatment. With the Paul Dudley White path on a structure, DCR can't really come with boats. They don't have boats to maintain the river's edge. So one of the challenges that we're trying to solve with them is how we can design a shoreline treatment that allows them to potentially access it from the upper levels down to the bottom. And the steepness of the slope is in the challenge because it's quite steep at the moment. So there's more presentation of the challenges that we're trying to solve in these really narrow spaces. We looked at another option too, that just to find more tools at our disposal to address some of these challenges. And the main thing here to highlight is a sort of submerged sheet pile wall that would be underwater. And the primary purpose of this is to prevent us from having to fill further into the water just to meet the bottom of river grades. And that's just fill that works against us in the overall project permitting. So this is sort of another tool we might have at our disposal, yet it doesn't solve this maintenance access issue. So this is where we're at now. And so we are working with DCR and MassDOT to find other solutions to help address some of these problems, but also to retain some of the goals that we're trying to achieve that we've been talking about. I did want to jump ahead and show you a little bit about where we're also going with our discussions is we're beginning the discussions about the park design. So this is a 1,700-foot long park. At its max, it's about 150 feet wide. It's going to have Paul Dudley White path going through it, pedestrian paths, and also connections into the street grid. There's also chances for stormwater retention and infiltration that we can use in this park. There's not a lot of space for a lot of high active uses, but it's probably more like a linear park that's passive uses in general that we're starting to, starting to design, think about with DCR. This is a cross section through sort of the middle, a wider section of this park. And just a couple of things to point out. This shows an existing embankment, this kind of orange dash line, is much steeper. And what we're trying to do is, are there opportunities to soften that slope, where we can then provide not only a more manageable and maintainable river's edge treatment, but maybe there's opportunity to provide a more interesting river's edge where we can get people closer to the water because we have access from the park to get there. And we're not stuck in this very narrow throat area. We're also looking at, on the left-hand side, how do we provide a landscape buffer to Soldiers Field Road? So some of that, is it berming? Is it walls? Tree planting? We're just exploring these options. And then all the while in the middle, getting our pathways to move through it, and also to find opportunities for that stormwater retention infiltration. So these are some of the things that we're working through. And again, it's just sort of an update of where we're at. And this is very focused of a lot of our meetings at the moment is working through all of these issues. And now we're trying to pull it all together, particularly with this park design, to see what our opportunities are. So we can stop there for a few minutes of questions on the shoreline related matters.
Thanks. Once again, we'll take one of the written questions in the Q&A, and then we'll take a raised hand in person.
Great. I have a question from Dira. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that name correctly. She asked, can you clarify how high the resiliency wall would be and how that would address flooding impacts and how it relates to the NPC's proposal of pumps to remove stormwater flooding or other strategies to addressing flooding impacts to the project?
Yes, Mark Fobert, Tetra Tech. The height of the wall has not been established yet. We have some space in there we're going to use. We're making some space available in there. It's mostly for the future flooding. It's about 2050, 2060. There's the possibility the Charles River Dam gets breached or overtopped. That would not happen if there were improvements made. What we're looking for here is a flexible solution that can be adapted in the future. The wall could change in height. If you could put foundations in and then do the wall in the future when it's more determined whether you're going to have flooding from the Charles River or not. And so it's mostly it's in a flexible place right now and adaptable depending on what happens with the dam and what happens in the future. But we feel that the need to leave some space in there to have that future resiliency feature. Did that answer the question?
I believe so. I'm going to move on over to Harry Madison, who asked, please move the paths as far from the highway as possible and also create the most attractive and noise blocking barrier along the highway. I can read. So thank you for that comment. And I'll pass it over to Leah for raise hand or live.
Yep, we're going to take some in person now. Thank you, Hung.
Hi, this is Fred Uloris speaking, and I was impressed in seeing in your shoreline alternatives some rather creative and heavily engineered designs. And as we're in the phase of examining what is possible, why couldn't there be an option 3, which does not include the boardwalk, but carries the planted slope through the throat? I know there may be some permitting issues involved in this, but ultimately it would be a lot cheaper, a lot easier to maintain, and a lot more appropriate to the general coastal landscape of the river.
Fred, I'm not sure if, are you talking about putting the walkway next to Soldiers Field Road and having a sloped bank or having no walkway or no boardwalk?
You keep the walkway, you take away the boardwalk, and you extend the slope in a manner that reflects the design you have for the park further upstream. I know that there are permitting issues related to this, but having encountered these in a multitude during the Big Dig, you can get past it.
True.
Good design can give you good results. So I'm just asking, why not at this point, when we are just talking about alternatives, try something a little simpler and just show what it would look like?
Yes, and as Dave said, this is the beginning of our effort. And we do
Also the widest part of the river short of the basin.
Agreed.
Okay, so there's room for this.
There is, and we're looking at that constraint from the Army Corps, that 1 acre, but there's possible room to work a pathway closer to the shoreline. That would be a discussion with the permitting agencies also, but it's certainly a possibility that we could explore.
Really interesting, worth us having a chance to comment on and see it.
Yep.
We've got time for another in-person.
Kane Laren, Charles River Alliance of Voters Task Force member. As a boater, those granite walls are the worst condition on the river. And I think one of the things that this entire project has been an opportunity to improve is not repeating terrible decisions that have been made in the past, but looking at the best way to solve for all our users how we go forward. And a vertical wall bounces waves back and forth. It's not safe if you go in the river, you can't get out. I would discourage the idea of extending a longer wall and pinning the river in instead of making a better landscaped bank.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear the concern and the questions, and would agree. So, I mean, I think a wall version is not the goal of any of this. Where we do.
Either the landscape architecture team or the MassDOT team can talk about timeline and next steps, and particularly how DCR and other stakeholders can be engaged as the many design challenges start to be dealt with on the shoreline.
I can address the DCR piece. We're meeting every 2 weeks now with the DCR. And they have within this presentation, they expresses some of their concerns. So we're in constant communication with them. We're making some great progress along those lines. And
yeah, I mean, we don't have a set timeline to come to an agreed design for all of these, because as you can see, there's a lot of challenges that we're working through. So the regular meetings now that we're having is what's allowing us to generate new ideas and sort of improve treatments along the edge. So it is sort of an ongoing process, but I think we are at this stage really heavily engaged on it. So whereas before, our conversations were not as frequent. So now we're on the road here. So this is good.
It's also driven by the DEIS schedule and advancing those chapters that have to do with the riverfront.
All right, thank you. We're going to come back to the rest of the questions. There's a bunch in person and online, but I'll have Susan finish out the presentation for us.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to go through a few really quick updates. I'll try to keep it super brief. We're approaching time here. So just general updates for the US DOT grant applications. We submitted two. We submitted a mega grant for $200 million and the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods for $500 million. Since our last meeting, we believe that all of the awards for the mega grant application have been notified. Allston, unfortunately, was not one of those. We haven't received our official decline for that $200 million, but we're aware that the other monies have been awarded. But the one that we were really targeting for this project in either case was the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods. We feel that it's a really good fit for this project. We really hit on all 7 of the criteria, which are equity, environmental justice, access, so new improved context-sensitive transportation, facility suitability. The facility creates a burden or barrier for the community that would be removed. Community engagement, equitable development, climate and environment, workforce development, and economic opportunity. So, we check all the boxes for this grant, so we're really hopeful. We should hear by early spring, if not by the end of this month. So more to come on that. For the Lincoln Street noise barrier, we do understand that this is a really strong ask for the community. As we said at our last meeting, this is not prohibitive as an early action item, and we're really looking at ways to bring that to life. We're looking for, how we would do the funding for it. It was brought up that there's an Allston to Brighton bikeway vision that the city of Boston has. We've since gotten some information from Boston Planning as to, what those plans are. It's not designed on Lincoln Street at this point, but we're looking to kind of fit in and look at what the wall alignment would look like a little bit closer to the highway, what could be allowable to leave space for that follow-on project that the city of Boston would like to put into play. So that's really it for general updates. We do want to leave this rest amount of time for questions, and I do want to recognize that that we have presence, Ken Miller from Federal Highway here. We have Chris Osgood from the City of Boston, and I wanted to know if you had any, statements or early questions. Okay, so we will go back to the routine that we were doing with questions. This is open up to all questions now. We could jump back to just those few that were already in there.
Yeah, so now that we're in the general one, any topic is okay. Going back to previous ones is okay, and we'll generally take 2 from the in-person audience, 2 from online, and swap back and forth like that. And you may have heard I have a 2-minute timer going, so that's what that is. All right, let's do in-person first this time.
Hi, my name is Fred Salvucci. A couple of comments. First, thank you very much for a really good, concise presentation on very complicated stuff in a coherent way. And I think a lot of progress on stuff that many of us have been asking for. To shift into negative, some of the elements that MBTA has not been in the room and is basically screwing this project up, if I can speak frankly. The midday layup is ridiculous. That's been clear for at least 8 years. There is nobody, including people at the MBTA, who can defend it or believe it's ever going to get built. But it chews up a lot of space and screws stuff up. And the bypass track, if it's needed at all, does not have to be to the south. It could be between the 2 Worcester tracks and not screw everything up. So I realize that's beyond your control, but there's a Secretary of Transportation that's supposed to coordinate things, and she's new, but this has got to get resolved because it's really screwing up the project. Specifically on the Cambridge Street Bridge, the clearance issue with the railroad would not be nearly so much of a problem if the bypass track were not located on the extreme southern edge, which is pushing everything higher than it needs to be. If there were no midday layup, which is the right outcome, and I believe the outcome that will eventually happen, and if there were either no bypass track or a bypass track between the 2 tracks, then you could get better grades on Cambridge Street because you're going to be moving the track into the current 3-track, what used to be 3 tracks, but it's now vacant. You almost certainly need to do that for construction staging. So there's point 1, that decision's, you're putting a lot of very hard work, lots of expenditure of consultant effort that's wasted because this decision that should have been made 5 years ago hasn't been made yet. If that decision's made, and I urge that it be made quickly, I think it opens the possibility of some additional possibilities in that matrix you showed One possibility is that the total replacement of the deck could be an early action and doesn't have to be preceded by a temporary patching job. You could go to the right answer right away, either as an early action or as part of the full multimodal project. I think there's a huge opportunity to make Cambridge Street much, much better in terms of meeting ADA requirements by getting a couple of long overdue decisions made on the MBTA facilities. I think you're doing a great job, and I know this is out of your control, but it's got to get into your control because it's messing up a very important project. I got some more detailed comments, but that's the big one. Thanks.
Okay. Yep. Thank you for your comment. And I can assure you that we do have, fairly regular communications with the MBTA, and the current plan is to kind of have that bigger discussion with the City of Boston and MBTA, and really look at the MBTA's layover needs and look at the pros and cons. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Glenn Berkowitz with A Better City. My colleague Tom Nally is a task force member. Susan, in the interest of time, since we really don't have that much time to really dive into too many questions, would it be okay if we submit maybe some written questions or some, have some other way rather than to try to ask too many questions now and then bump up against the time? So if you don't mind, maybe some of us will submit some questions to you about some of the slides that we saw after today. I hope that's okay.
Sure, I'm always available for questions. One thing I really want to be cognizant of is that we like to give everybody the same level of information across the task force. There's a few members that ask really good questions, have a lot of really good ideas, but the intent for the task force is to kind of have everybody hear those questions and answer. So let's try for some of the bigger questions.
Okay, I with all due respect, I'm not going to try, since for 3 of the 5-minute segments I raised my hand and wasn't called on, and I've got 6 questions for 3. So I'm not even going to, we'll have to figure some way out. But I just wanted to make just one friendly suggestion, which is if you go back 2 or 3 slides to the slide that shows the park, the long park, the park west of the Throat. So I just wanted to suggest that where you show the 14 feet for the cycle track, and then you have the number 10 feet on top, which I assume is the clear width of the cycle track, and then you show a 6-foot buffer space, and then was it a 6 or 8 foot for the sidewalk? I just wanted to compliment you on that design and suggest that that's exactly what we should aspire to do on the People's Pike, or what your slides call the South Side Buffer. And I just wanted to compliment you on your pedestrian bicycle accommodations in this slide, and give a shot in the arm that we try to do this same kind of thing wherever we can on the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take 2 virtual now. So I'm going to start with a raised hand. David, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Leah. David Lautzenheiser, task force member. The Reconnecting Communities grant, one of the key criteria here is removing, retrofitting, and mitigating highways or other transportation facilities that create barriers to economic activity, et cetera. I don't see how a 12-lane highway up against the river is mitigating or removing a barrier. It's actually creating a significant barrier between the city and the river. And as we've seen from the good faith efforts by the shoreline mitigation to actually create a vegetative buffer, this can all be resolved by removing several lanes of traffic, removing at least 2 lanes of traffic in this project, creating an actual living shoreline, perhaps putting the pathway along the edge, along the embankment instead of into the river. I've been saying this for 10 years, and having just gone through the Big Dig podcast and seeing some of the mistakes that Fred was involved in years ago, that we avoided, but yet we're making one of the biggest mistakes again, creating this project with 16 lanes of traffic and railroad into next hard up against the river with no looks like no air rights. I apologize. I'm frustrated. I just feel like we're just dancing around the big issue. Is that there are too many travel lanes in this project, and all of this could be resolved with a lower cost by reducing and making the travel lanes more efficient. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Could you state your name again, please?
Sorry, it was David Lutzenheimer.
Okay, thank you, David. So that was under the facility suitability criteria, creating a burden or barrier for a community. So this roadway is going through a rail yard with a bunch of looped on and off ramps. They're taking up, the total area of the project is about 100 acres, and what it's doing is opening up about 40 of those acres for new development, a whole new street grid, multimodal transportation. It's a transit-oriented development. It's reconnecting Allston. There's really no way to get from the Allston neighborhood to the riverfront. It's opening up about 5 or 6 acres of parkland, of DCR parkland on the Charles River Reservation. And I'd like to have somebody from the design team from Tetra Tech potentially, if they'd be willing to speak to the number of lanes on the highway. If that would be Chris Calnan or Mike Hall. Great.
Yeah, good evening. Chris Calnan with Tetra Tech. So, David, we echo and understand the concerns and what you've kind of said all along. It's not like the team has ignored this issue. We have studied it. I think we've presented some data in the notice of project change. It kind of looks generally at the number of lanes that's needed for the highway. At the end of the day, it's a balancing act, right? We've got to balance the needs for all the modes on this project, and this is the challenge we have. Going forward, we will have new modeling. It will be investigated yet again if we can remove lanes, and if we can, we will. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, and before we go back to in person, let's take a written Q&A from virtual.
Yeah, there are some questions regarding the bus parking, but I think Harry Madison has the one that has the most regarding that. All right, so I'm going to ask that question. Say, well, why do our independent operation for 3 private shuttles needed? This requires a lot of space and paved area. Also, why is there so much emphasis on private shuttles instead of the MBTA bus service that is more equitable and accessible to all?
Thank you. So in terms of independent berths for the 3 different shuttle routes, we completed an analysis of an expected frequency that 3 independent shuttle routes would be serving the station, and at a 5-minute frequency during the peak hours, 6 berths would be required in order to serve that many buses. So there wouldn't really be berths sitting empty. That's just the minimum number that would be required to serve the anticipated routes. And then in terms of private shuttles versus public, the busway itself will be physically able to accommodate MBTA buses if those were ever run. Right now, the private shuttles are the assumption, and while they might be privately operated, the assumption in terms of modeling purposes is that they're publicly accessible.
I'm going to jump over to Dira's question regarding the stormwater component. The throat area has the shortest path for stormwater runoff pollution from the roads can enter into the Charles River. Removing 200 linear feet of green barrier will shorten that distance even more. How will stormwater runoff be mitigated in this section?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're excited about is the improvements to stormwater. Right now, we've got 15 or 20 DCR outfalls discharging directly to the Charles River with no treatment. We're looking to combine some of those and treat that stormwater in the park area. And so that'll be one of the great improvements. We'll be meeting the stormwater standards, and there's also a TMDL out there we're going to be meeting. So there'll be great improvements to stormwater as a whole because of this project.
Thanks. Let's go back to some in-person questions now.
Thanks. This is Stacy Thompson at Livable Streets again. I actually had a similar question around the MBTA buses related to West Station. And specifically, so I heard that you all have talked to bus ops, but have you engaged with the bus network redesign team?
I'll answer that question. Mark Shavin from VHB. Yes, we have.
Okay, and are you saying at this time that that team has no plans to look at new bus routes to and from this area? And because I'm just, right, there are 5 phases to the bus network redesign. It seems sort of a no-brainer that we should be hearing from the MBTA about the various routes they might be able to do to Kendall, to Harvard, to the LMA area, and if that it's even possible to replace or minimize the private shuttles. Because I hear you on them being publicly accessible, but they are not perceived by the public as publicly accessible. They don't pop up on the MBTA apps, right? Like there are all these reasons. So I just would like to understand more deeply where those conversations are with the T.
Yeah, so I'll start that, and my colleague Mike Gordon's on the phone here. He can answer better than I can. But we have had the conversations. I do know that they are concerned about getting their bus network redesigned, design system in play before they start thinking about expanding beyond what they've already planned to do. I don't know if Mike has something more to say about that, but I don't think that right now the bus network redesign team is considering alternative routes through big project areas like this.
Okay, so I think one request I would like to make is to ask the T to actually look at this. This is like a once in a generation. I know that you all don't have control, but it is a once in a generation project, and I completely agree that the T should be thinking about the operations they might be running 10, 20 years from now as we build a facility that is going to serve those future routes. It seems sort of like very obvious to me. But then just separately, because I know we have limited time, I was wondering that in future conversations where like we're talking about T facilities, could we have the person from the MBTA who you've been talking with in the room? When we talk about the shoreline, could we have the DCR contact in the room? And when when we're talking about CTPS modeling, could we have CTPS like present that? I think it would be really helpful to have those folks doing the presenting part of the conversation so that it reduces the amount of back and forth you all have to do with us in the room. So that is a request as a task force member.
That is fair and something that we'll explore. Thank you.
Sorry, just a very quick question. You mentioned that you have ongoing conversations with DCR about shoreline alternatives, and you're discussing parklands. Similar to what Stacy just said, is there an opportunity for task force members to either participate or learn more about the details of your discussions with DCR about parkland and the river's edge? Can we be in on that at some point so we know what the tone of the conversation is and what direction the design direction the conversations are going?
Yes, we do understand at this point that that's a request, and we'll explore our options for kind of having that targeted conversation with a greater group. We do have a really great design team on this end, including landscape architects, Brown, Riches, and Rowe, and Urban Idea Labs, working on what we would put into a design build contract, which is put out at about a 25%. So there's room for growth. We need to, have this really basic, great concept. So yes, we'd be willing to talk about what some kind of design discussion looks like.
Will that 25% design have a 25%, all the alternatives brought to a 25%?
No, it comes with, the parameters that, these must-haves that are in the project. One design is developed to 25%. Okay.
So there'll be time for everyone to participate in the progression of that one design, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to go back to virtual. Brendan Kearney has his hand raised. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Great, thanks so much. Brendan Kearney, Walk, Massachusetts, task force member. If the Reconnecting Communities grant application is not successful, will we receive feedback from USDOT that will help us make changes to the project, i.e., a need to reduce lanes from the project, like David Lepsenheiser was talking about, which also may lower total cost? Thanks.
So what we would do in that instance is ask USDOT for a debriefing. So yes.
All right, and I'm going to take another raised hand because there's some people who've had their hands up for quite a while. Bill Degnan, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Leah. And thanks for the presentation. Bill Degnan from the City of Cambridge, task force member. So I wanted to comment on the shoreline options. As some others have noted, I think having a natural shoreline is better for many reasons, including the ability to have more plantings there. As others have noted, it's really the number of lanes here that's keeping the space for planting kind of at a minimum. Feels like every time we see this, the planted area gets narrower and narrower. But I would encourage you to look at those options, including having some kind of barrier between the roadway and the Paul Dudley White path. Going to be a great deal of noise for people on the raised path there next to the 12 lanes of traffic. So whatever you can do to minimize that noise, I think would be great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the comment.
Yeah, let's go in person for 2 now.
Just a quick comment. I think the discussion on the river edge is very good and very interesting, but I think there's a strong need for a planting buffer between Soldiers Field Road and the Turnpike. So I realize how tight it is, but if some space can be made available, you've got a real heat island if there's no planting strip there. And I think that this is the widest part of the river. I mean, the pinch point of the river is up at the BU Bridge. And I think I think a lot of priority should be given to the space between the Pike and Soldiers Field Road. Partly it's aesthetic, partly it's environmental, partly also you don't want to be driving eastbound on Soldiers Field Road at night and be blinded by the headlights of a car coming on the turnpike and be confused as to why he's on the wrong side of you. That's a potentially very confusing and disorienting thing. A little bit of space would be good roadway design and good environmental design. And I think that that needs to be on the table when you're looking at the river.
Yep. Thank you for the comment.
Thank you, Susan. And just if it hasn't been said enough, to Chris and Susan and the whole team and everyone here in person and online, thank you so much for everything you've done to have such a great meeting and all the prep you've done and to give us a slideshow in advance and all that stuff. Just want to say thank you. Quick comment and then a question, which I think is around slide 13 or 14. It's where you had the columns for option 1 and option 2 for the Cambridge Street Bridge. While you're getting that, the quick comment, and I'm sure it's no surprise to some of the folks on the design team, is prior to the this past December, the last time the MUTCD was a new edition came out was in 2009, and just in December they came out with the new 11th edition. And my understanding is they made major changes in the whole structure of so-called warrants for traffic signals, which came up a couple times on your slide. And my understanding is they made it a lot more flexible in the 11th edition than they did in prior versions. So I just wanted to just flag that for future discussion. On this slide, two questions. Under the option 2, which seems to have an A and a B, preservation and replacement, when we replace the westbound sidewalk under preservation, does that mean we can take over the space that's currently used by the sidewalk and use it for bicyclists as opposed to automotive vehicles?
Yes, it does.
Okay, very cool. And then my general question is, just rough ballpark estimate, throw a dart against the wall. What's the rough cost of option 1, the preservation, and the replacement? Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. So, as you can see in laying out this criteria, we do not currently have costs for these fully developed. So we'd rather not kind of state that ballpark in this public forum. I think we talked a little bit about it at the Cambridge Street site walk, and I believe those numbers, they've grown a little bit and they look differently, whether they're part of the multimodal project or outside of the multimodal project. So it's something that we've chosen not to talk about right now.
All right, we're going to go back to raised hand virtually. Harry, you should be able to unmute yourself.
I do actually just want to go back to one second. I just do want to go back to one of Glenn's comments regarding the traffic signal and meeting warrants. This is something that I've talked to the state traffic engineer about. I am not a traffic expert, so I don't know if if Wayne or somebody else would like to address this, but my understanding is that the language of having to meet one of those warrants has not changed. So, and also even if there was kind of that flexibility, it is Mass DOT and the state traffic engineer's preference, that we do meet a warrant as stated in the MUTCD, even in the updated version. So, thank you. I just wanted to get that with everybody on the call, but I'm sorry. Harry Madison, please.
All right. Sorry about the juggling there. Harry, you should be able to unmute yourself. Yep.
Sure. So should we get, US DOT funding, we would be working with that kind of target date of, September 2026 or whatever they have required for us to meet that obligation of funding and complete that environmental permitting within there. So what we're looking at for CTPS modeling, we'll have that completed in the middle of this summer, so we will not have those documents this summer. But we're still working on a schedule. We're constantly still working on that schedule with CTPS and trying to figure out exactly when we'll have those filings and different ways that we can shuffle the filings. But our ultimate goal is to get that within US DOT's guidelines, but it will not be this summer.
Thank you. Hung, want to do one of the written Q&A before we go back to in-person?
Sure. I will go with Mike Chivia, although that the person is not part of task force, but just to elaborate on the space within the area regarding the lane amount. So to what Mike put up is to follow up on Dave's comments. I don't think that I90 can be limited due to the very need for access from the west to the city, airport, etc. However, perhaps the need for Soldiers Field Store Drive immediately along the river could be critically questioned. So thanks for the comment. And then moving on to Rich Gerver. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your last name. The water users representing by CRAB and Riverside Boat Club directly across the river want to participate in an advisory committee on the shoreline treatment in order to ensure that the design is as safe as possible, particularly for rowers that could be impacted by any structure.
Thanks for reading those comments.
Thank you.
Let's go back to in person.
Hi, this is Galen Mook again, task force member. Actually, this is the slide I want to bring up, so thanks for keeping this on here. I want to definitely thank Katie and Wayne and all the team for doing what we asked with this Cambridge Street overpass. This is going to be a small story, but we started this whole thing even before there was an Allston multimodal project on this bridge itself. And over 11 years ago, we were having similar conversations about, can we rebuild, can we reconstruct, what are the options? And now finally, 11 years on, we were actually able to see side-by-side comparison. So this is not a gripe about the time, but actually this is a very well taken, very dense analysis. And I'm incredibly appreciative that as a resident who uses this bridge almost daily, that I think that you've hit the major highlights of how the options between rehab and totally rebuild are being presented. I want to highlight two things though. There's one bullet point tucked in the far right corner here slide, which is grades to be ADA compliant. Just want to highlight that of course is obviously, I know you have a whole slide on this, the primary reason for us to be arguing about this bridge. We need to bring this into modern sensibility, modern even being 1991 at this point. So let's make sure that if we're going to build something that's going to be needing to be reconstructed. Can you go to slide 8, actually? And I promise this won't be very long. If we're going to be doing another 30 years of this, let's not be waiting another 25 or 30 years to then make it potentially accessible to those who need it. So now is the time to do this right for the community. Also want to point out that though this says design life of approximately 25 to 30 years, this is a design from the 1960s. So actually it's a design life of 90 to 120 years. So let's not rebuild the mistakes from that era in the 21st century. I would love to see this slide rebuilt and restructured so that it's not replacement, but actually brought into modern sensibility, or option 1, left in the 1960s. And phrase it that way and then see how you want to approach this project. And the last point about pricing.
That's time. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, can I just say that maybe don't do it by numbers, but do it by relativity. So option 1 is 25 years, replacement 75 years. Is it 3 times the cost? And put it in sensibility like that, knowing that the money is fungible, but when will we have to come back and actually deal with this properly? So I think my points have been made, so thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Any more in person? Otherwise, we'll read some Q&A or do some raised hands virtually. All right, I am going to go to Jessica Robertson. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Can you go back to one of the slides of the bus loops?
Sure. Is there a specific slide?
Yeah, this one's fine for now. So where is the actual entrance to the actual station?
So the orange boxes, those highlight the station head houses where you would be able to access the platform, the rail platforms.
Okay, so you're
stairs or elevators.
Okay, so you're not envisioning an actual, station per se. It's just stairs and elevators.
There's an ongoing effort in terms of how the actual plaza area would be programmed. Part of that effort is looking at potential canopies, so there would likely be more of like a station feel, a station element. It wouldn't simply, most likely, it wouldn't simply be the stairs and elevators.
Okay.
That answers your question.
Yeah, and sort of related question is, you know, I know Harvard is planning a lot of air rights development in this area, and just wondering where the conversations with them stand, and are these bus loops envisioned as being, you know, the quote unquote ground floor of an of a larger air rights development, or would this remain, you know, an open air bus plaza forever?
So this is Mark Shannon from VHP. We are talking with Harvard consistently, including this specific question. We're still trying to work out Harvard's desires. You know, we are flexible to go either way, whether there's going to be air rights or not. Right now, we're thinking probably not, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. As I say, those conversations are still ongoing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's do a time check. I know we're a little bit over our scheduled end time. Susan, there are 5 questions in the Q&A left. Also, Jessica raised her hand again, so she may have a follow-up. In person looks a little antsy, like they may want to leave soon. What are we thinking?
Yeah, I don't know if somebody's been waiting on there for a while. I guess we could take one more online and one more in person, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, a lot of them are questions back from like when we had to go past the bus lane specifically.
Yeah, four out of the 5 Q&A is relating to bus lane, and this is the slide that I think that will be most appropriate with.
Okay.
Maybe we'll just try to do a bunch of those. So I'm already unmuted, so I'll just read one. The first one's from Harry. Why are bus lanes being evaluated at this point instead of already being part of the design, especially for Seattle Street? What are the pros and cons?
So it's Mark Shannon again. So we would love to have bus lanes. Let's not be unclear about that. Ideally, bus lanes would be provided all around. We are having CTPS evaluate all of the traffic that would be coming through here, including all of the highway traffic that would be generated as people come through the Cambridge Street Bypass Road and are trying to get onto the eastbound side of I90. There's only so much space up here. As you can see, the deck area does cover almost all of the Beacon Park yard south of the eastbound off-ramps and on-ramps. And we do have to process all the traffic. If we could make bus lanes work, we certainly will. But until we have the data back, we know how much traffic is trying to be processed through here. We can't commit to a bus lane at this time.
Cool. Thank you. I'm going to unmute Jessica again as well. I've sort of let the people in person do follow-ups, so we got to let her do one as well.
Thanks. Yeah, and I know you guys it's difficult to manage the hybrid version, but you know, it's a little bit rude to mute people when they haven't actually used their 3 minutes yet, because, you know, we may still have follow-up. So you could just ask if we're done or wait for the 3 minutes.
Sounds good.
So my point about these bus loops is that, you know, I just think that the question of whether or not there's going to be air rights development over this bus plaza is crucially important to whether it's acceptable to have a bus plaza for private shuttles. I think we all would support, you know, great operations for publicly accessible buses, and there's questions about whether these will be future MBTA buses or publicly accessible, private, et cetera. Like, understand all of that. But the idea of, you know, we're trying to create placemaking around West Station. And so the idea of having this giant bus plaza where private shuttles are laying over is nowhere near the highest and best use. So I would really like for, you know, at the next time that we talk about the bus plaza to have a little bit more input from Harvard about whether the proposed designs are compatible with future air rights development and what their plans. I mean, obviously they're not going to say what their plans are, but preserving flexibility for future air rights development. And now I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that, or?
Well, I'm not sure if there's a question there, but yes,
okay.
I mean, we're constantly talking to Harvard. Like I said, we'd love to be able to come back to you and give you a definitive answer, but I just can't do that at this time. And I don't want to speak for them.
Yep. All right, and thank you for your comment. Okay.
All right. Susan offered the option for one more in person. Anyone want to close us out, or are we all good?
Okay, excellent. All right.
Looks like we're all good.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our meeting for tonight. Thanks for coming out and attending online.
Thank you.